Hi, I'm Brian Johnston, Head of Impact at Kogo, based in Wellington, New Zealand. Welcome to our webinar series, Unlocking Climate Action for Business. In this session, we're going to run through the fundamentals of carbon emissions and climate change. Kogo is an impact-led fintech whose carbon tracking API and consumer app enables users and businesses worldwide to measure, reduce, and compensate for their impact on people and the planet. You can't manage what you don't measure. It's a pretty common phrase in the world of business. It means that you can't know whether or not you're being successful at something unless that success is defined and tracked. At Kogo, we believe that measuring is the starting point for achieving impact. Measuring and managing the non-financial impact businesses have on the environment and on society is no longer optional. Governments are implementing regulations to meet carbon reduction goals. Consumers are shopping more consciously, and employees are seeking values-aligned employers. People are increasingly aware of the impacts of modern life on the planet and care about the world that their kids will grow up in. They want to support businesses that will help them take positive action by helping people and the planet. However, carbon footprint management is a complex area, and as highlighted in recent Kogo research, business owners often feel overwhelmed when it comes to setting sustainability goals and determining how they're tracking in comparison to competitors or within their industry. This puts businesses at a crossroads between adapting to the demands of the changing environment and taking positive climate action. On the road to limiting global warming to around 1.5 degrees Celsius, the big but achievable goal is for global greenhouse gas emissions to peak before 2025 at the latest and to be reduced by 43% by 2030. Before we dive into how, for many people the concept of carbon is complicated, to say the least. So the first starting point is to understand the basics of carbon emissions. The interesting thing about carbon is that while it's emitted locally, the impact is felt at a global level. 1 tonne of carbon emitted by a business in Australia has the same impact as 1 tonne emitted in the UK. Regardless of where in the world we are, we're all contributing to climate change. Secondly, the term carbon emissions is actually a grouping of different gases that contribute to global warming. Included are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and various fluorocarbons, as well as ozone. Each of these has a different warming impact per kilogram of the gas emitted. To make it easier to understand this, it all typically gets expressed as the total of carbon dioxide equivalent. Carbon dioxide is recognized as the main driver of global warming, with methane the second most significant. Carbon dioxide will be the main component of your carbon footprint. In short, all emissions matter. So when you think about what your business's footprint is, it goes beyond the fuel and electricity, which is referred to typically as Scope 1 and 2 emissions in your business's direct operations, to also include the embodied emissions in your supply chain and even the use of your products by end users, which is referred to as Scope 3. Every material, product, or service you buy or sell has a carbon footprint associated with it, with carbon emissions having occurred from, for example, mining of materials through to the manufacture of the product and beyond. Scope 3 emissions typically represent around 2/3 of the total carbon footprint of a business, so they matter. Looking at different types of emissions, they can be categorized as follows. Scope 1 emissions include, or are referred to as direct emissions and include, on-site energy generation, for example, diesel generators that you may have on-site, fleet vehicles, for example, sales rep vehicles or delivery vehicles, and any on-site heating processes, for example, gas-fired heating, gas-fired ovens, and so forth. Scope 2 is reasonably straightforward. It relates to indirect emissions related to purchased electricity. Scope 3 is indirect emissions also, and those indirect emissions relate to either the supply chain, which is referred to as upstream, for example, food ingredients, product materials, and finished products that you're using for your business, and the downstream component, which is referred to as the use phase as well. And the examples there are the electricity use of appliances that you may have in your business, waste disposal of organic waste or otherwise. In short, there's no pathway towards net zero for your business without Scope 3 emissions being addressed. Scope 3 emissions can be significant, and your business has a responsibility to work with your suppliers and others to reduce them. They're not easy to engage and reduce, but they are important. Our recent business carbon footprint tool uses market-specific spend-based and whole of supply chain emissions data from environmentally extended input-output models to provide businesses with an actionable overview of where they are, where they need to go, and how they can make the biggest difference. When we calculate the carbon footprint for your spending data, we include not just the direct emissions of your activities, but also the indirect emissions associated with the supply chain of the products and services that you sell, i.e. the raw materials extracted, manufactured, and then transported to you. Cogo's approach provides businesses with an overview of where they are, where they need to go, and how they can make the biggest difference. While it's typical to aim for bigger action and impact, it's equally important to look at the progress you can make with small, single actions that are part of a longer journey. We encourage this by applying behavioral science learnings in our products to structure the user experience and ensure users are engaged in taking climate action. We make sure that the route from footprint to action to implementation is broken down into bite-sized chunks that are easy to follow and outline longer-term changes by changing habits. Once you understand climate change and how carbon emissions get calculated, it's time to start measuring. We know from our research that every business's sustainability journey is unique, and it's important to acknowledge where you might be on this journey. You may be at the beginning of your journey, getting started, in which case you want to be educating yourself on what it means and which actions are actionable. You need to set realistic targets, and you need to think about how you're going to calculate your carbon footprint. You may be on your journey already, but you'd like to do more. In that case, once you have the basics sorted, then you can start looking at how to offset your remaining carbon footprint, or you might be looking into collaborating with others in your supply chain, for example, to reach net zero. And if you're further progressed in your journey and you're starting to think about how you can lead the way, then you can pursue a carbon certification such as Toitū in New Zealand or Climate Active in Australia, or the Carbon Trust certification in the UK. Not only that, you can also encourage others, your customers, your peers, to collaborate and to have an even bigger impact. Thank you for joining us. I hope you found this webinar valuable, and we would love to share more resources with you to help encourage you to take that first step towards taking positive climate action. In our next webinar, we'll talk about some specific examples of measuring your carbon footprint and how the Cogo Business Carbon Manager can absolutely simplify this process for businesses that have limited time and resources, but are committed to taking positive action. If you'd like to join us, register your interest at the link in the description below.